it's probably worthwhile talking about secondary game systems, because it was very weird. Because it was you could kind of say Blood Bowl was maybe the first secondary game system, but it wasn't thought of in that way, Blood Bowl, because it predated.
Yeah.
But in my mind, Necromunda was where we started doing, these sort of like games that were designed to come out, have a relatively short window of sales, and then would be retired, and then we'd do another one and another one, while Warhammer and 40k were continuous and ongoing all the way through.
Theoretically Epic as well. That was we always thought of Epic as, well, after 1991, I think we thought of Epic as being a third continuous system, didn't we?
Yes, it's hard to remember. Yes, though
we did, because we did lots of supplements for it.
We did for Space Marine,
yes.
Sort of like for second edition.
Yeah. It just didn't quite work out.
No.
Mostly because the markets that we were going into at the time were suddenly new markets, France, Spain, Germany. Epic was great for the established market, I think.
Yeah, but it used a lot of cards, which was always a problem with the translated thing.
Murder.
Yeah, but I think the other thing was that it didn't sit easily with the way that the pricing was working for the sort of like 28mm, 32mm miniatures.
That was the insane way they worked out prices.
Yes,
It drove me mad.
Yeah.
Warmaster suffered from the same problem.
No, absolutely. So I think that there was, in a way, quite a sensible drive to increase the prices for metal miniatures and then plastic miniatures to a level that would make Games Workshop properly profitable. But it became almost like a mantra, like it was, I think that there's a big difference between the way that people played the epic scale games and the way they played the 28mm scale games. That they were more interested in having lots and lots of miniatures, weren't as into them being as finely crafted.
Yeah. You couldn't get away with a small force, could you?
No, I think the idea was that it was a big army with lots and lots of tanks.
Well, it was all a micro warfare game, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly that.
It was our attempt at 1/300 scale World War II in space.
And I think that Space Marine worked brilliantly like that. But then when we did the relaunch, I think there was the third edition rules, which is my fault basically. I got carried away and simplified them too much. But the pricing at the same time was hugely higher than it had been before. And I think that just kind of like meant that Epic kind of like it failed at that stage and effectively became a secondary game system because of that. It just couldn't keep up.
Warmaster suffered exactly the same problem at the same time, and half the reason was that we were starting to professionalise the senior management to the extent that these guys who'd come in from Boots often or wherever, usually Boots, would look at the sales figures for all these different lines and go, you hardly sell any of that, let's stop making it. And what they were pointing at was the generals for Warmaster. And I'm going, well, if you can't buy generals, nobody's going to buy the army, are they? And they go, well, you don't understand, you don't sell any of these, get rid of that. I say, oh my God.
No, it was hard. It really was hard.
It was.
But I think that ties in with the desire to do the secondary game systems in a way that didn't require ongoing support, basically. That was the thing I remember.
That's right. I think as people, I say, as kind of creative games designers, you always want to find a way of getting new games out, don't you?
Yeah, you do.
But I think also as somebody who's sort of running the product line or influencing the product line later on, I always thought that you're talking about the people that play games as what can we do for that? It's not just a question of how can we make money, it's how can we do stuff that's interesting and exciting.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. If you make stuff that's cool, it's popular basically, and so you achieve both of those things together.
And if you can, even if you know your resources are going to be limited and the sales guys' energies are going to be limited, you're going to get a short sales window. Yeah. So you kind of craft the whole project around that, don't you?
Absolutely.
And I think Necromunda was that.
No, absolutely. Well, that's the way I remember it, was that it was the first time that we really said, what we're going to do is we're going to do this game. It's going to have a set number of armies, but they were gangs obviously for Necromunda, and there'll be a limited tail of support for it, and then it's finished.
And then we'll do
and
another
then we move on to another one.
I have to say, it didn't work out.
No, it didn't. No, it didn't. It didn't work out. But I think the thing was that the problem was that Necromunda was just too good. And so you kind of like made it, and then people were going, well, when's the new stuff
Can we have
coming out
Space
for it?
Marines in Necromunda? No, that's not the point, guys. And then you end up with... You dilute the idea, I think, in the end.
Oh, you do that, but I think that it's I think what Games Workshop's always been very good at is creating hobbies, and so we created a new hobby, the Necromunda hobby, and that wasn't particularly the plan at the time. What we wanted was something that was going to be like a really good Christmas present.
And something you can play over that year or the next 2 years is a bit of fun.
That's right.
And then what's the next one? And at the time. I'd kind of figured out that what we could do was use that as a plan for exploring the 40k universe in detail, rather than everywhere in the 40k being the same. It's all God, praise the Emperor, past the Space Marines. You could go to a world that was the Eldar craft world, that was nothing to do with the Emperor. You could go to the world that was the Night world, as we had for I think the Epic range originally.
I think that one of the things that I can remember us talking about early on was that with Rogue Trader, the galaxy was a really big place in the original sort of like IP of the game. It took like decades, centuries sometimes, to travel from one place to the other.
That was the idea.
So everywhere was very isolated, and it meant that Space Marines were very important because
they had to have 1,000 chapters. They're all over the place.
And they had to have autonomy because they had to be able to act on their own initiative in the area that they were in. But also that created this place where you could have somewhere like Necromunda, which was effectively, for all intents and purposes, isolated. And then you could do a new place and a new place. And I think as time's gone along, that's a difficult concept to wrap your head around. And what's happened is that...
Is it?
Well, it's like trying to figure out how far it is from here to the nearest planet and things like that. It's always further than you think. And difficult to imagine. And what's happened in the background is that the galaxy has got smaller and smaller. So now it's just like it's ever so easy to kind of pop over.
World War II in space.
It is. Yeah, it's become World War II in space. When really what I think we were thinking of was more kind of like ancient Rome
or medieval Europe,
also.
Feudal Europe or
the
early
New World.
Renaissance.
When people were just going off and they'd I've just started watching Shogun actually, the new series of Shogun, but that's got a good feel for the taking a year to sail from Europe to Japan and figuring the way through. That was for me the vibe that we were looking at, and that's part of what informed Necromunda and those other places.
That was always what 40k was about, and of course because I've never moved on, mostly because I stopped looking when Andy Chambers took over. I just kind of handed it over to Andy. I'm very confident that Andy could sort it out, but it would be Andy's 40k, which to some extent is why it ended up being World War II in space, because Andy's very much
he loves his World War II history and stuff like that. But I think also it's a two-way street, that kind of stuff. I mean, the idea that Space Marines are popular because we want them to be popular kind of like isn't the way that it works. Space Marines became popular because as much because we want our customers really liked them as because we did, and you kind of like you follow that as you're going along, and there's a natural kind of like push for things to go in that direction. It creates a kind of almost like a gravitational pull.
That's right. There's a strong narrative comes from the retail as well, where they're trying to organise campaigns, and they go, well, we're going to fight this Space Marine chapter against that Space Marine chapter, and you go, yeah, of course you can do that, and say, oh, then we'll incorporate it in the background, or we'll write it up in White Dwarf. Yeah, you realise these two Space Marine chapters are like light years apart. It would take 20 years for them to reach each other. No. So it always ends up being everybody's in the same place. So the sandpit has eventually become...
It becomes...
whatever a very small sandpit is called.
It's a paddling pool.
But Necromunda, as you say, it does... it fits in with that pattern. It's that let's explore this world in detail. And we'll never have Space Marines there, and there'll never be orcs there. And it'll always be the world of Necromunda. It's ruled by Lord Helmore as a feudal lord.
Yeah.
He's the ultimate power in this world. You'll never see an Inquisitor for one decade to the next. Yeah, right. It all went, didn't it?
It did in the end. Though, I mean, to be fair, I mean, it's still, I mean, I think that Necromunda, almost more than any of the other, well, later, they were originally called secondary game systems, but we decided that made them sound a bit naff, basically. So they got renamed a specialist game system to make them feel more special. But for the specialist game systems, I think Necromunda's got just the best background. It's just such a fantastic idea.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, it's two strands, aren't they? I mean, it's inherited the work that had been done for Brian Ansell's Confrontation project.
That's true, yes, yeah.
So that's kind of the seed of it. And I can't really remember much about that because I didn't have much to do with it. It was, I know John Blanche did lots of concepts work for it, which is all crazy stuff because Brian was trying to use the idea of a capsular universe to realise his vision of a science fiction world, which had nothing to do with 40K.
No, it's a lot to do with laser burn, basically, isn't it? It's the laser burn background and game system for Confrontation originally.
I wrote it up for him. I'd never played laser burn in my life, but I was aware of it. And Brian asked me to basically rewrite the system for and we published it in Whiteboard.
We did.
What a system that was.
It was so incredibly complicated. It was like, because Brian was very good at doing maths in his head.
He was a maths graduate.
I know, well this is it. So sort of like saying, okay, what you've got to do is take 17, multiply it by 4, subtract 8, and then add 13. I was like, of course, that's easy, isn't it? Anybody can do that.
And then divide it into a system, into a turn-based system that was divided into both thirds and quarters.
Yeah. No,
so you go, whoa.
I can remember saying to him that I thought it would be a good idea if we just went in 5% increments. And it was,
more detailed.
No, that was the work of the devil.
So really, all that initial work, when it came to doing Necromunda proper, I largely ignored it. But what we did have was the concept of this planet called Necromunda that was a waste with these cone-shaped hives in it. It was a hive world. So we had some artwork. In fact, we even had a little bit of film that had been done by Bright Light Studio.
I don't think I've ever seen that. No.
Just a sort of like the cone shapes in the background. So we had the world, and we definitely had Lord Helmore. And I think we'd done something like an Imperial Guard regiment. It had been described, or John had drawn it.
So the name was around.
There was a name, and it was called something like the 8th Spiders. I can't remember. So the idea of the world being, the name being there, Necromunda, I don't know who came up with the name. I've no idea.
No.
I have to say, it sounds very me. It's kind of got that. It's a bit of Latin, and it makes a word, but it means Death World.
It sounds scary and cool, basically. It makes you kind of go, what?
Helmore as well. I'm not sure where that was Brian. It might have all been Brian, but I honestly don't remember. But when we came, we inherited those things. And the game system, the original idea of gang warfare was mostly set in it was between almost like aristocratic brats, with some sort of strange cultists in there, because it's Brian, he likes his cultists. One of which was killer clowns. It's killer clowns from outer space, Brian. People love it. So when it came to actually doing the real thing, I ditched all that and I thought, we're going to do a Wild West game. This is going to be cowboys in space.
Absolutely. Gangs, basically. Gangs. Because, I think that, that's, when I started to get involved, it was at the stage, I think it was Andy was doing the core rules, actually, and it was going to be basically the 40k game system. And my involvement was primarily to do with scenarios and the campaign system, because I'd come up with the campaign system for Blood Bowl, and Necromunda kind of like
That's
reskins it
I
basically.
thought that was a really good basis to do the game development and everything.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because that's what I remembered from playing Wild West skirmish games when I was in my teens, basically. I loved Wild West skirmish games, played them lots with the old West skirmish rules. And those rules had some really interesting stuff in them about how to run campaigns, how to run narrative campaigns, and the idea that you had effectively a player character. And I think one of the things I find absolutely fascinating about the early history, not really of Games Workshop, but at the same time that in America Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson were coming up with Dungeons and Dragons, in the UK you've got people playing very similar games, Wild West skirmish games, but they did the role playing in a slightly different way, one player would create the scenario, the other players would involve their player characters, they'd play a game on the tabletop, and then that would get written into the annals of Pima country, as I remember, or something like that.
County.
And they'd keep the story going.
It's interesting because I think I was reading something the other day about this in the early history of D&D, and the early history of Mike Blake and co. The Bristol War Games.
Bristol War Games.
And their Wild West rules, because the tradition is that there were no contact. But the reality is not, and in fact the guys who were in the same War Games club as Gary Gygax and Arneson did have access to those Wild West rules. I think that was...
Well, I think the one of the things that that I came across, I was reading through, as you do, old copies of the War Games newsletter. Donald Featherstone, like photocopied little fanzine it was back in the day.
I have quite a collection.
But if you look through them, what you'll find is that they have Wild West skirmish game battle reports, and then letters from Gary Gygax
talking about his fantasy
the stuff that he's doing. So those things were going on, and they were all aware of each other. They were reading the same magazines, and they were part of the same community. So I think there's an interesting kind of like crossover there. But for me, my very first role-playing experiences predated Dungeons and Dragons, and we're playing Wild West skirmish games.
Exactly the same with me.
And so for me, the idea that if you're gonna play a Wild West skirmish game, and I knew that that's basically what Necromunda was doing, then it needed to have a campaign system. It needed a way to link those games together, and for the members of your gang and the characters in your little gang to kind of like go along, get better.
I think in the original Wild West rules, the 1970s ones we're talking about, that was done rather abstractly. I don't think there was a fixed system. But of course, the time we did Necromunda, D&D could be out role-playing and become established, and that idea of having a fixed methodology, and you'd used it for Blood Bowl.
Well, exactly. And so Blood Bowl uses effectively exactly the same system, really. And it has the same problems. Actually, interestingly, I think that the system in Blood Bowl works really well for about a season or so of gaming, but then it tends to mean that you get either like into a death spiral, like your team just gets worse and worse and worse, or you a runaway leader syndrome where your team becomes Manchester United, basically, or whatever it might be. A similar kind of thing ended up happening with Necromunda. I think the campaign system would tend to kind of they get to a stage where you say, okay, now's the time to retire this gang because it's just too good, and we're going to start off again. But to be honest, I don't think that was a major problem, because most campaigns tended to peter out really before you hit that terribly much.
And of course, there's no way we could play test it for that length of time to iron out those.
No, absolutely not.
And as you say, that's a problem with almost all campaign-based systems. They tend to quickly turn into Davids and Goliaths, don't they?
They do. But I can remember the other thing that I worked on was the scenarios. So there is effectively like a gunfight scenario where I've forgotten exactly how it worked now. There was a rule about like who was going to draw first, and like who would blink first. Which was a fun little scenario to play. These two gangs kind of facing off against each other at very close range. So it was. I think that you take those archetypes and things that you've enjoyed yourself in your own experience and put them out there to a wider group of people. But then, the background that went along with it wasn't the Wild West. It was something completely weird and different, and I think that's what made it such a great game.
Yeah.
Was that it took things that we knew would work and would be fun and entertaining because we played those kind of things, but then it married it up with this real kind of like, the 40k background up to then had been very broad, and this suddenly kind of narrowed into one place. And said, and look how crazy this is, because it's nothing like all of the stuff that you've read for 40k so far. It's a completely different place.
It was a completely new world, wasn't it? It's a classic thing where you go, take one from column A, Wild West, and one from column B, industrial hell, and marry them together. And you've got it was something that seems to be quite original. Actually, it's very typically 2000 AD.
Oh, absolutely. I know. I think that 2000 AD is a huge influence on it. I mean, not least the the hives being a lot like the mega blocks, mega. What would they call them in
Mega City?
Mega City. Well, Mega City is but there are lots of the tower blocks in there.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. So, blocks. It's all block mania and all that sort of thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, definitely. I mean, there is a strong 2000 AD vibe, but again, it's not exactly what it does. Is it twists it and spins it, and kind of it's informed by that kind of like rather cynical, because the nastiness of the hive and that kind of it is very dystopian view of this society. It's not a fair society in any kind of way. It's like, and you've literally got these tiers where it's like the closer you are to the top,
that's right.
The richer you are, and the more wonderful it is. You get above the smog level, all the rest of it.
It's a good gag. But we set the entire game in the utterly the underhive.
Exactly, you were in the dregs.
Desperate people, carving out some sort of life amongst the sewers almost.
Well, I like the Spires fitted well with that kind of like basically going down and hunting the plebs down in the underhive, but then occasionally coming a total cropper. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think that's that's basically how it started, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then the 6 main gangs that we did, I kind of figured out what we had in the way of resources. And because we didn't have all that many figure designers at the time, and they all had, in those days, the figure designers tended to have specific talents. So, you couldn't really get Kev Adams to do anything that wasn't a goblin.
Yeah.
You still can't.
That's true.
Well, it's his thing.
It is, yeah.
He's the goblin master. And the Perrys, you couldn't get them to do anything that wasn't a historical archetype or a reference to something like that. And I think Jez similarly Jez could turn his hand to anything, but he tended to be Space Marines and Eldor, didn't he?
He did, yeah. He did Escher, didn't he? And
exactly, because they're the ones that are most like Eldor.
No.
In fact, the parallel really is that the 6 gangs replicate the 6 core ideas in fantasy. So you get the one that's fast and light is the Escher, so closest to elves. Cawdor were almost like the plain Empire equivalent or the Imperial Guard equivalent. They're sort of bland. The Goliaths were really big and tough. They're kind of like a cross between dwarves and orcs, really. And the Vansar, were they the very technical ones?
They were, They were kind of like advanced and sophisticated.
That's got like a dwarf element, because there's an engineer thing going on. I can't remember the one was, but
Orlok.
I don't quite remember.
There may be a bit of a mishmash.
Yeah, it might have been. Yeah.
I think that there was also they all looked different. And there needed to be enough of them for there to be a proper choice. And I think also to allow people to say, well, I'm going to collect 2 or 3 of these, basically, that you didn't just have to like concentrate on one. You could collect several gangs if you wanted to. I think, and then that kind of like takes us to the box as well, because then there was there were metal things coming out, but the core set, we'd got the template basically from 40k and Warhammer, the big box set with 2 plastic gangs in,
Terrain.
The terrain, and I think that's the other thing that made Necromunda so successful. And that's down to Alan, wasn't it? Basically,
Well, I don't know about that. It was Tom Kirby. When we explained the game to the execs, Tom Kirby being our boss, the CEO, and Tom had this immediate idea, and he goes, "Oh yeah, and we can make it like an oil rig. So all the games are fought around this, basically a three-dimensional chessboard.
yeah.
So everything's on this
I
board.
didn't know that.
And I'm sitting there going, yeah, that's not going to work. Interesting idea, but it ain't going to work as a war game.
Yeah.
You know, you go up, down, but you're never further apart than that. So I thought, yeah, interesting. So I then have to manage expectations at this point because the boss's idea, you know. And I kind of turned it into that system where we just had lots of constructed scenery. Which you could make into walkways and games.
Yeah, well, I think it was really clever. It was that one piece of plastic.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah, okay.
I actually did a mock-up of that out of cardboard.
Okay.
So I glued it all in places. And actually made it in card and gave it to Terry Aldina at the toolmakers, and they replicated it. There was one set of connectors they couldn't get, which would enable sideways movement. And in the end he said he couldn't do it, but other than that, and then Dave Andrews designed all the little...
The cardboard bits that connected them together, didn't they?
Well, the plastics all had little bits of detail on them,
Yeah.
and Dave did them as plates,
Okay.
and then they might have spark eroded them in, something like that. But I was quite pleased with that.
I think it worked brilliantly well, and then you've got the cardboard bits that kind of connected them up, so you could put them together in lots of different ways. But then, when you were playing, it worked really well as a game, I think, because it gave you that ability to go up and down quite easily. It was I found that it really. The game rules where you're kind of like, seeing somebody was really important in that game because you're quite likely to get shot and killed if you weren't careful.
Yeah.
So, kind of sneaking around and kind of positioning the models carefully and then looking to
there was
see
that
what you
judgment,
could see.
how much of it can you see going on, wasn't
That's
there?
right, that's right.
There always was in the original 40k.
Yeah, but it worked really well with that few number of figures.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just that level of detail was appropriate and made it a very tactical, interesting little game to play.
Yeah.
I always enjoyed playing Necromunda. It was because quite often you work on games and you think, well, this is okay, but it's a bit of it doesn't completely kind of captivate you. But Necromunda, I loved.
Well, it was also a time when we were transitioning from the traditional paste up into a digital format. And I think at that stage we were still doing paste up, and we had all those little sidebars and pieces done as artwork,
Right.
and then stuck them down to give you that sort of look of it's sort of everything framed by industrial technology.
No, I remember.
Yeah.
It looked great.
I mean, for the day, I think it was quite clever. It was nicely done.
Yeah, the box looked great as well. I think the only thing that we got wrong was absolute classic thing. In the original Necromunda, all of the models are standing on little green flocked bases because Brian had said that the studio wasn't allowed to show models that weren't on flocked bases. So it was kind of like, I can remember saying, it must have been 12, I'd say, you sure this is a good idea? Because it looked really weird to me. And no, this is a way it makes the figures look much better. Was I think the theory that green made them look uniform and great. And then as soon as the game came out, people just went, why are all of the models standing on little patches of grass when they're living in this sort of like industrial hellhole underground, basically?
Well, my gang's all on green.
Yeah, mine too, actually, because that's what we did. We had to do, basically.
Well, all the tables that we had to playtest on were green.
Yeah,
so when you photographed anything as a battle report, it was on green table.
Yeah.
So having green bases matched the table.
It did. But I think we hadn't quite thought it through, really.
Well, I think we
went beyond kind of like that stage. It worked okay for Warhammer and 40k, because our 40k games were generally put on sort of like deserty planets and things, weren't they, at that stage? Because it was sort of like predated the 40k, everything's in a city. sort of look.
Did it go that way? I don't remember.
No, it did. Well, it is now. That's what scenery is
Okay.
for 40k, basically.
What gangs did you both play?
I think the gang that you've taken some pictures of, so that's a playtest gang. It wasn't one of the six, so I didn't play. I played a gang, and because they're all identical actually within the game system. The look of the models is different, but they've got very, very tiny, almost like tiny little bits of difference between them, which I think is on the skills that they can learn. But otherwise, all six gangs are basically identical. So I just had that gang. I can't remember the name of them. They would have had a name because I'd have been tracking their experience and stuff. But they were the gang that Nigel Scratch built for me. Basically, Nigel Stillman said, "Look, I've got this for you." I was like, "Cool, thanks, Nigel."
We like doing that sort of thing. And scratch building was a big part of the game, wasn't it?
It was absolutely.
Was intended to be. It was always intended that would be something that would encourage conversions and.
Yeah, absolutely. Back then, and especially with something like Necromunda, it was suitable for it because, I think there's this idea that the equipment that a model was carrying could change. So you start off as a Juve and you've got your kind of las pistol or las gun or something, but then you get upgraded and you manage to lay your hand on a bolter or something like that.
Right.
So there was this kind of hope, I think, rather than an assumption. There was this hope that what you'd then do is get another model and kind of like give them a bolter instead of a las gun or something like that, and do the scratch building. But that never really seemed to happen terribly much in my experience.
People just wanted to buy. I want to buy a Cordor wither this and wither that, and so in the end we had to make more than we anticipated. Yeah,
no, absolutely. There's that again, and it's an interesting thing about that kind of like it's a two-way street, the way that games develop and the products that a company makes, because what you anticipate is going to be successful and will work, and everybody will kind of like, "Wow, this is the best thing ever," isn't always what people want.
No.
And then you kind of respond to it, say, "Okay, fair dues. We'll try and make you, like models with just the different sorts of weapons, so that you can kind of like buy the model that you want to represent that particular gang or whatever it might be."
Yeah, the guys in retail were never shy on telling us what they thought would be what was selling and what they thought they needed.
No, absolutely.
And we responded. It was one of those things where you could respond quickly if you like, but you'd always do it at the expense of doing something else, because you'd be onto another project and you'd have to pull a designer off doing one thing to do.
Yeah, well, I think that was the whole thing with the Necromunda, was that there was the core game and the expansion.
Yeah.
Wasn't there? And because the expansion was planned, wasn't it? It was part of the original thing. It didn't just get tacked on.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was called.
Outlaws, is it? I think.
Outlanders, something like that. Because that's got this. I'm pretty sure that was part of the process, that it was planned in. But then that was it. That was going to be it once that came out.
Yeah, the supplements were always seen as a big deal in those early days. It's one of the things that we were kind of committed to doing.
Yeah.
But then we did lots of stuff.
It became a hobby basically. There was just people didn't want it to go away. They wanted it to remain available.
Yeah.
It was very, very popular, and there were people, for quite a lot of people, that was the Games Workshop game that they played. They weren't particularly interested in collecting big armies, but Necromunda was just right for them. But I think by the stage, and that's where it started to kind of unravel a bit, basically, the plan, because you'd got this demand for something, but not enough resources in the studio to be able to permanently support it. Always be making new models for Necromunda and bringing new things out. We just weren't set up to do that.
And also because we were doing more armies for Warhammer and 40k, you're just piling more and more work on top.
Well, also we'd got the next, specialist game system. So it was which had already been in the pipeline and sort of like trundling along. So the plan was a good one, but it didn't quite work out. But in the end, that's what kind of led to the formation of Fanatic and the specialist games, kind of like team.
Yeah, I think by the time we started up Fanatic or specialist games as a concept, we'd already got to the point where we knew we were never going to be anything other than a Warhammer 40k and Warhammer, and let's see what else we can squeeze in. because there was just no way. The main studio wasn't really up to doing all these different things.
No, it was always very difficult to justify, I think, doing specialist games, because effectively the resources could always have been used to do something for one of the core game systems. Would almost certainly have been more, would have sold more, basically. Yeah. So how do you do that? And at the same time, you've got people who are very, very dedicated, absolutely obsessed about the specialist games that we'd made over the years and wanted to see more things done for them. So the solution that we came up with was creating Fanatic, which was hived off, very hand to mouth, basically. Little kind of, I think, just doing a kind of a little drip feed of support for all of those game systems was the plan. And that worked okay until Games Workshop hit a kind of like financial bump, basically, in the road, and then Fanatic got closed down because it wasn't generating as much money as the main studio, and that was the end of that, really. But it's coming back again. I mean, you've got specialist games, like Division of part of Forge World, and they've done their new version of Necromunda.
Haven't they done the new version of Warhammer as well?
They've done, yes. So they've done. It's called the Old World, which is effectively Warhammer 9th edition, more or less. Set. I've forgotten exactly when it's set.
It's like 300 years before Warhammer Fantasy, I think. I think you've got the 3 emperors in the Empire. Something like that.
And there's civil war. So they've got it's got a tight focus, and they're not covering every single one of the different armies, which has caused a dreadful fuss.
Well, I think they are insofar as they're doing PDFs for everything, but they're only doing additional and printed support for a limited selection, which I have to say is entirely sensible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They struggle from the same thing. Forge World is a small operation compared to the main studio. And doesn't have lots of designers and doesn't have lots of resources to be able to do these things. But it is self-contained, and it's completely separate in a way that Fanatic really wasn't, I think. So it's and it's got a director as the person in charge of it, which certainly helps as well. But their Necromunda game has had is quite different, I think, in terms of the game system, but effectively the IP and stuff is the same. So Necromunda lives on and is still, extremely popular. All these sort of decades later.
Just shows that we've done good.
So it was a good game, and it was a fun project. Again, I think it's one of those things. There are games that you work on, you think that was hard work, and there are games you think, you remember really fondly because. I think you can kind of tell from the conversation that we've had, really. I mean, like sort of talking out to the camera, as it were, now, but that it's a team effort, and the best projects are ones where everybody kind of like brings stuff in that adds, and you create something that's greater than some of its parts somehow or another, because everybody's kind of got this great idea. The miniature designs did brilliantly, the artwork was great, the scenery was good, the game system was great, the background was amazing, it had a cool campaign system that basically worked.
The whole studio was interested, we all played that game, and even people like, in England, who's an artist, he actually played it and he wrote some of the colour text in it because he was quite into it. He kind of got the idea.
Absolutely. Well, it worked really well as a studio game because I think Blood Bowl had kind of shown us the way on that, because there's a certain amount of crossover between like the development of the two. In particular with Blood Bowl 3rd edition, the way that it was tested and developed was that we ran a league in the studio, and what was great about about Blood Bowl was that you could play it at lunchtime. You could play one half in a lunchtime, leave the board set up, and then play the second half the following lunchtime, or stay after work and finish a whole game. And Necromunda worked in basically exactly the same way. It was quick enough and fitted really well. So you've got this building full of very enthusiastic, quite young hobbyists. And everybody just had a blast basically playing it, and we'd have there'd be banter and stuff, and leagues and things in where we made our coffee, basically a board with stuff written on it and challenges and all that kind of stuff. So it meant that everybody was invested in that game.
Yeah.
So it didn't feel like it was something where one little group of people were doing it. We were all doing it.
Yeah, it's probably about the last thing that you can say that. Because I think after that, there was a certain pressure to do things, but it didn't feel as if it was evolving at a natural pace.
Yeah.
You look at something like Orca Morca, that was it's the same idea in many ways, but it was just agony.
It was
done in a few weeks, wasn't it?
Yeah,
basically,
it was thrown together.
It was.
I did a video with Andy, and he said it was about 8 weeks, and it was very much get it in, get it out.
Yeah, no, there's a great article on the internet somewhere about the kind of like how what happened there, because I think there's a lot of history to do with the specialist games division and the way that Games Workshop kind of like transitioned really from being a very hobbyish, rather amateurish, to be perfectly honest, company into a much more professional organisation. But but there were ups and downs to that process, basically.
I always talk about it in terms of it being very much led by creativity or studio led, and then it became sales led. Yeah. And I think under Brian, although Brian Ansell would very much put a different hat on and become a salesman and focus on that very tightly. He wasn't. He was had a mind for sales, but he was more interested in exciting stuff.
Well, so he set things up so that the studio was in its own little bubble. Yeah. It wasn't. There was no conversation or meetings with the sales divisions and stuff.
If there was, it happened on a level above us. That was sure.
But I think also, my memories of the early studios when we were at Enfield Chambers, which was just a nuts place, a rabbit warren, but very cool. And then Low Pavement. I think Low Pavement was just the ideal location. It was once it had air conditioning put in. That's a whole story.
Castle Boulevard, you thinking?
Castle, yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, so Low Pavement was Enfield Chambers. Yeah. Castle Boulevard was a great site. I really
once
enjoyed
we had air conditioning put in.
Yeah, that's right. So
it was one big glass roof.
It was one big glass roof with no air conditioning. And we got to this summer, the first summer when we were in there. It was so hot that people couldn't work. It was unbelievable.
I had to get in at 7 o'clock in the morning, open all the doors to get a through draft, and in the end we hired a portable air conditioning unit.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Which had a big sort of snaky trunk thing that went out into the car park.
So yes, that stopped us doing really anything other than sitting around, kind of like thinking, when can I go home? But once we got that sorted out, it was a fantastic environment. We'd got because really everybody was there in that kind of, it was almost auditorium, like it was a nice space, it was close to town, had the gaming tables that were free for everybody to use, really. And everybody there was on the same wavelength, everybody was involved. So I think that Blood Bowl definitely benefited from that, Necromunda too. And then it started to kind of like go down a bit, I agree, after those two game systems. And then when we moved out of from Castle Boulevard into the main site, it just wasn't set up in the same kind of way.
It was never the same after that. I was always a bit disappointed that they didn't give us a bit more space. They gave us probably as much space as they could, but it wasn't quite as big. It was just slightly smaller.
It wasn't. The atmosphere changed a lot when we moved to the new site, and that kind of like the design studio as being this kind of basically ivory tower. It was deliberately set up like that. It stopped really being the case. You're just another department amongst lots of other departments, all of whom were important to Games Workshop.
Can you imagine that? You remember the madness that went on in Enfield Chambers? Can you imagine that going on Willow Road?
Well, Enfield Chambers in particular. I mean, that was.
You'd be arrested.
You could be arrested, absolutely. Yes. Richard Halliwell and
Chaz Elliott.
Yes. Mad, bad, and dangerous to know. In both cases.
Both cases. God bless them both. Yeah. Happy days. Yeah, that's probably about it for Necromunda.
I think so.
Well, fading memories or not up to any more.